Secret of the Mimic has been out for about 2 weeks and it's still shrouded in a veil of mystery. Frankly, I think it will be for a long time. We finally got a FNAF game that is filled with so much information that's useful, but not necessarily direct, so there's still plenty of implications and speculations we have to make. But one of those mysteries that I think we can, for the most part, answer right now is, what exactly is the Mimic? And I don't just mean like, what is this endoskeleton, but how was it created? Why was it created? And why is it a problem now? Because before Secret of the Mimic, we all understood that the Mimic was an endoskeleton that could fit into any costume and replicate personalities. But now there's things like M1 versus M2, a shared endoskeleton, Cradle.exe. So what do all of these details mean for the Mimic and its creation? Well, Slices, put on your aprons and let's bake ourselves a theory. It would probably make the most sense if we start with the direct information we get from the game. So what does Secret of the Mimic tell us about the Mimic? Well, we mainly get technicals. We know that the Mimic is something of two parts, the physical hardware and the digital software. The hardware is the endoskeleton we see in-game. This thing, which from some sources seems to be made out of tungsten. That tungsten, which explains why it's so nearly indestructible and so ridiculously strong. But it's designed in a way that can grow and shrink to fit in any costume. We see it in the flashback tapes, we see it in-game, and we see it in the secret ending getting small to represent David. That aspect of the Mimic is one of its best assets, and it's probably why it was eventually going to be used by Fazbear. That's an incredibly useful thing for an endoskeleton to be able to do. But that is just the physical aspect of the Mimic. The real danger here is that the Mimic is also powered by an incredibly sophisticated program, one that can seemingly replicate any personality it's given enough information on. And this program can give itself information with the things it observes around it. And that's, unfortunately, all the non-speculation, non-implication information we have about the Mimic. There's some other direct information which we'll bring up as we go, but we're already going to have to start speculating to fill some gaps here. Warning ahead. Now, it seems like the Mimic itself was created primarily to entertain and watch over David while Edwin got work done, and it wasn't until later that he saw the economic potential in selling it. Edwin introduces David to the Mimic as M1, the first iteration of the Mimic. And David seems pretty apprehensive at first, but Edwin explains that this robot will be able to wear any silly costume that David wants, be a babysitter, a part of the family, something to help the house run after the death of Fiona. But that's not where it stays in its role or even in David's mind. In the birthday tapes we get in the manor at the end of the game, it seems like M1 eventually replaced the role of Fiona, speaking like Fiona, being called Fiona, and taking care of David, calling him darling and the like. Just listen to the difference in how Edwin refers to the Mimic in its first audio log.
David, I want to introduce you to someone. This is M1.
Mimic 1?
Why does it look like that?
Look like what?
It's scary.
Oh, it's an endoskeleton. It won't always look like this. It'll wear fun costumes.
Versus a birthday tape several years later.
This is great. He's gonna love it.
White.
Fiona, did you make this?
I baked it myself for David's special day.
At some point, the Mimic stopped being M1 and started being Fiona. So what changed here? Well, I think it has to do with training data specifically, but there seems to be a cause for that, and we find it in the Tiger Rock basement, this dark maze-like section that everyone was terrified of, including myself. Oh, Lord. Okay. But in there's a secret room off to the side if you backtrack with one of the nightlights, which lets you into a Mimic-themed workshop with this audio log that I'm just going to play in full. Note, all the other audio logs, as far as I'm aware, say 1, 2, 3, 4 on their frequency, but this one says 4625, the same number from the mailbox in the Help Wanted 2 teaser, and a number that's referred to a couple more times in this game. Regardless, listen to this audio log.
Recording? Test. Levels are good. This is where I heard it. It's her or someone that sounds like her. Set frequency to 4625. Hello? Hello? Is anyone there? Over. Say something. It's me, Edwin. Over.
That's good, honey, but from the party.
So what is this? Keep in mind, this side room, while very, very hidden away, has no collectibles. The only purpose for this side room is this optional audio log, which doesn't lock any endings behind it, and the surrounding environmental-based lore. So whatever this audio tape is trying to tell us, Scott and Steelwool thought it was important enough to give it its own room, but hide it away so it's just as secret. So what are we hearing in this audio log? Well, to me, it seems like Edwin is doing something known as a spirit box or a ghost box. Traditionally, these are radios with unsecured connections, and the idea is if there is a spirit or ghost in the room you are in, those spirits can manipulate the frequencies the radio is receiving to try to edge words out of the radio. Now, it's important to note here, for the people who believe in spirit boxes or ghost boxes, nobody believes that the ghost is directly talking through the box. That's not the ghost's voice. The belief is that the ghost is manipulating the frequencies already being received into the radio to pluck out specific words already out there and play them. In other words, imagine if I was using a spirit box, and at the time I'm in the room, there is an AM radio signal that's broadcasting this message.
And so the world was cleansed, as the flood killed the non-believers many years ago.
Mark did not like that impression. It's summer all right. You can tell I'm already sweating. There's no AC in this office. Now imagine at the same time there was another signal that was playing this interview clip. He may just be another man to you, but not to me. Now, in the theory of the spirit box, a ghost could manipulate the frequencies of this radio to play specific portions of those signals at any given time. So if a spirit wanted to, theoretically, you would hear this from the spirit box. Man
Killed
me
many years ago.
Again, to be clear, in the belief of the use of a spirit box, it is not the ghost speaking through the spirit box, it is the ghost using the frequencies of the radio and the pre-recorded messages within it to play specific words. Here's the actually best way to describe it. Remember Michael Bay's Transformers movie? How Bumblebee talked with the radio. Kinda like that. So I bring all of this up because Edwin is doing a sort of spirit box in this basement with his audio log radios. And the audio that gets played through is Fiona's voice, but it is a previously recorded snippet of Fiona's voice. She says this exact line in one of the birthday tapes. Some people have pointed this out to discredit the idea that a ghost is involved at all. And while it still very well might not be a ghost, I bring all of this up to point out that this is the way that a spirit box would work, being manipulated to play audio that already exists in the world. So what is this environmental storytelling telling us? Well, this Mimic Workshop is directly attached to the most paranormal feeling room in the entire game, a basement where a dismembered head costume of a white tiger teleports around, gives us visions, and tries to catch us in the dark. Regardless of how the Mimic works, I think that suit is a ghost. That guy is not real. But I think one interpretation of this workshop with this audio tape being placed next to this room is possibly implying that M1 was possessed by Fiona, and that's why it was such a perfect recreation. Now, is that the only possibility here? No, because there's another reason why M1 could work incredibly well, and it's the amount of data that is available to train. If Edwin eventually wanted to turn M1 into Fiona, there's plenty of data to study for M1. Fiona's voice is recorded and replayable throughout the entire environment. Not only through Mrs. Helpful, but through audio logs and birthday tapes, there is so much information for the Mimic to learn Fiona. So even if M1 isn't possessed by Fiona, I think this audio tape is telling us that Edwin thought she was. And that might be why in Edwin's mind, M1 is so successful. Meanwhile, it could just be the amount of data that M1 has to learn about Fiona. So if that's why M1 is so successful into becoming Fiona, why isn't M2? Why was M2 created? And how does M2 eventually end up overtaking the Mimic endoskeleton? Well, for a while, M1 is enough. M1, or eventually at this point F10N4, Fiona and Leetspeak, is able to watch over David and keep him safe while Edwin continues to work for the company. But I believe that at some point Edwin realized how lucrative a Mimic endoskeleton with a version of this program could be for his company. Now, from the audio tapes, Edwin did not mean to disclose the existence of the Mimic to any co-workers or potential buyers yet. We get this audio log saying just that.
Project update. I figured it out. There's a leak. Someone told them about M2. Well, they can't have it. Every copy has failed. I don't even know why it worked the first time. But it did. It's just not ready.
Not only does he describe his confusion on why M2 won't work, and he doesn't even understand why M1 did work in the first place, but he mentions that there was a leak. They're not supposed to know about M2 yet, but specifically because it's not ready, which implies that once M2 was ready, it would be set up for buyers. So M1 is watching over David while Edwin gets deeper and deeper lost in the creation of trying to make an M2 and failing. Obviously, he can't put M1 up to the market because 1, he can't replicate it, so he could only ever sell 1, and at this point, he believes that M1 is possessed by Fiona, so he'd basically be selling his wife, something he would never want to do. But eventually, on David's birthday, he sneaks out of his playground and dies in the shipping yard. This is never directly stated, but we know for a fact from an audio log that the playground is right next to the shipping yard that's incredibly dangerous, but Edwin says it's fine because he'll watch him. And then we know from the last birthday tape we get in the manor that him and M1 were preparing David's birthday and nobody was watching him at the playground. So it seems very likely that this is where and how David died. And it's at this point that M1 begins to pressure Edwin into making M2 into David. We hear this audio log right before we go to the manor.
Edwin, it doesn't make sense. It's terrible, and there's no logic behind it. It happened, and you have to deal with it. You did it before. We can fix things together. I am here to help.
And it's very clearly M1 trying to manipulate Edwin into making David as M2, which I'm not blaming M1 here. Let's be super real about this. Edwin made a robot and then trained it to be a perfect replica of his late wife. He essentially made a robot whose primary directive is being a mother, and then due to his negligence, his son dies, and now this robot he has created has no purpose anymore. It is made for one thing and it can't do that anymore. Imagine the frustration and existential crisis that M1 must be going through at this point. But eventually, Edwin refuses. He stops and realizes that none of this is healthy, and that this M1 robot isn't Fiona, and M2 wouldn't be David. Now, he then goes on to blame M1 for his bad parenting, which, look, I got problems with Edwin. He's a shitty dad in every universe. But he at least realizes that this isn't real and this isn't healthy, and refuses to turn M2 into David. I believe it's at this point that to distance himself from M1's personality, he builds the Mexus console, the mechanical X-Form experimental storage console, and places Fiona's personality and M1 inside of it, locked away deep in research and development somewhere he can avoid it. And that's when he takes the mimic endoskeleton and the remaining blueprints for M2 and goes to the manor to try to finish this project. In his mind, still, if he can perfect M2 and make a good replicable mimic, then he could sell that at an amazing profit and save the company. And he needs to distance himself from the distraction of M1 that he's created. Eventually, as he's working on M2, he has this free mimic endoskeleton now since M1 is inside of Mexus. And I believe that it's at this point that he puts M2 into the mimic endoskeleton, hoping that maybe this is the secret sauce he can't figure out. And it does work at first. M2 begins to function within the mimic endoskeleton, but to his horror, it already is becoming like David, pretending to be him, holding his plushie and making himself small. And that sends Edwin over the line. Already in grieving with the loss of his wife and his child, seeing this robot he's created, in his eyes, mocking the existence of his son, sends him over the top, and he beats the robot senseless. And look, I hate Edwin for a lot of what he does. And I think I understand the mindset he would be in to beat this robot in that moment. But you look at me and look at this little baby. I love this dumb idiot baby. Who the hell could hurt this thing? But in beating M2, he breaks its legs, and suddenly M2 now knows violence and can replicate it. And from then on, M2 begins biding its time and working on repairing its own legs. Eventually, Edwin's personal workshop explodes. It's unclear if this was Edwin's fault or if M2 did it directly. This audio tape seems to imply M2 did it to him since it was his experiment, but that could have just been a mimicked version of what Edwin said. Regardless, Edwin is trapped in the wreckage and calls M2 to call for help. But M2 says this to him.
Daddy's busy, buddy. Why don't you go outside and play?
Frankly, one of the coldest lines in the entire franchise. I can't imagine the catharsis of M2 taking those words and throwing them back at Edwin. But eventually, Edwin dies, Fiona is still trapped in the Mexis console, and now M2 has nothing to hold it back. So whenever Fazbear sends somebody to go collect it, it can do whatever it wants to those employees. So is that everything? Well, not quite. There's still one pretty major question that I think we have to answer in relation to the creation of M2. Something that will color everything we know about the character of the Mimic moving forward. And that has to do with the circumstances of David's death, because it may not have been an accident. To access the secret ending of this game, you have to play something called Moon.exe, which is an old-styled point-and-click adventure. I made a whole video explaining this entire allegory last week, which you can find right here. But the long and short of it is that I believe Moon.exe is an allegory for the creation of M2 and then Fiona's perfect version of what happens to M2 after. Something that would make M2 into her perfect son so her and M2 can live together forever. But because I believe that, this game implies something very interesting about the creation of M2. Early in the game, we are accompanied by a baby owl, which represents David, as it's a baby and you take care of it, you feed it, you play with it. But eventually we encounter Sun in an old cabin in the woods, Sun being a representation of Fiona, or specifically M1. And when we do something for M1, eventually she makes us a baby owl mask so we can get past the moon, or Edwin. And that baby owl mask tricks the moon into thinking we are the baby owl. The baby owl again being David. It's this moment where the Mimic is becoming M2, something that can replicate David. But here's the thing. When you do that, and when she makes the mask for you, the baby owl disappears. And if you ask her where the baby owl went, she smiles and says it flew away, lying to you. Because if you check her stove, there's something now cooking on it that smells like chicken. To make the baby owl mask, Sun kills the baby owl and cooks it. Which, if this allegory is to be taken literally, this game is implying that to make the Mimic into M2, M1 killed David. And this is something that hasn't made sense to me, because M1 does have means and opportunity. If David was all alone by the playground right next to the shipping yard, in that birthday tape, we get a direct line from Edwin saying, "Go and get David, I left him by the playground," which is the game telling us M1 was the last one to check on David. All M1 would have to do is open the playground and let David play in the shipping yard. There is a fence there. All M1 has to do is open the gate. And if M1 opened the gate and let David into the shipping yard, he'd get himself killed on an accident, and M1 can just say, "I came out and I found him dead. What has happened?" So that is a perfect opportunity and means. The thing that doesn't make sense though is the motive. Because don't get me wrong, once David is dead, everything M1 does makes perfect sense. As I've mentioned, she is a mom bot. She is a robot specifically designed to take care of a child. So the moment David is dead, the idea of M1 constantly pressuring Edwin to make M2 into David again so she can take care of a child again, that makes perfect sense. We know that the robot he created cares more about being a mother than anything else. We get the line,
I miss you, but I miss my child.
This is M1's primary directive, and Edwin took that away from her once David died. But if all that is true, why would she kill David? Because as far as the tapes we have go, M1 treats David like her own child. She calls him darling, she looks after him. If the Moon.exe game is to be believed, she fed him, played with him, dressed him, pet him. So why would she turn around and kill David just to make M2 work? Well, here's my current hypothesis. And I'm not going to even say it's a theory, because frankly, and I love this about the game, the information we have is so vague and up to interpretation, there are a lot of different ways to look at this. This is my current hypothesis, a hypothesis that has changed 5 times writing this script. It's the reason it took me so long to write it in the first place, because I could not decide what I liked most. But here is what I like most right now. I could change my mind tomorrow, but right now, here is what I think is most likely. Throughout the game, there are 2 tucked away documents that have to do with M1 and its memory. They read as follows. I had a strange sensation yesterday. It was like deja vu, like certain events had happened 5 or 6 times before, but then the sensation was gone and I got back to work. Sometimes I wonder if something is wrong with me, but I don't have time for those questions. And memory error. detailed report. We were expecting. There were complications. Consciousness was lost for an undetermined time. Once I woke, we were all together and happy, a family, but something was different. I felt wrong somehow. Was I me? I would never sleep again. Corrupted file suspected. Please advise. I believe these are reports of M1 going through her own memory drives. Because here's the thing. These memories didn't happen. This second note seems to say that Fiona died in childbirth and M1 awoke. But that's not true. We have audio logs, tapes, and a photo showing that Fiona lived through childbirth and died at Fall Fest later in David's life. But for some reason, M1's memory said it lost consciousness during childbirth, but she's fine and here again. So what is going on? Well, I think the books themselves can explain this. What? Oh, no, not that book. The novel trilogy. In the Silver Eyes books, Henry creates a robotic replica of Charlie after she's killed by William Afton. But so that the robot can live a normal human life, he implants false memories into the robot. Specifically ones where instead of Charlie being abducted, Sammy, her brother, was abducted and died, and she's the one who survived. I think Edwin tried to do that with M1 to further make it replicate Fiona correctly. And I think these documents show that whatever Edwin did was not done well enough, because M1 started to have these strange sensations of deja vu, these strange recollections that didn't make sense, and started to suspect that her own memory file was corrupted or not complete. So then why was M1 digging through its own memories? I think that's twofold. One, I think it's completely natural as any creation to try to understand what you are. But during this time, Edwin is struggling to create M2, and he keeps recording that he doesn't even know why M1 worked in the first place. I wouldn't doubt if, to assist Edwin, M1 tried to decipher herself and figure out how she was made so she could help Edwin. And if she was going through her own memories and all recorded media about her creation, there's a chance she found the tape where Edwin thought he was spirit boxing with Fiona. And if M1 found that, and like Edwin believed that the reason M1 works is because Fiona is possessing M1, then M1 could have came to the conclusion the reason it works is because it's being possessed by Fiona. And likewise, that's why M2 isn't working. There's no one around to possess it. So if M1 isn't possessed by Fiona, but instead is a cold, calculating, logical robot, and knows that, well, Edwin is trying to make M2, which is a copy of my program, and would be my child, all Edwin needs is the spirit of someone to possess it. What better than the child I'm already looking after? I will simply allow it to die so it can possess M2, work correctly, and we can all be a happy family. Again, in this hypothesis, I don't think M1 is possessed by Fiona, but I think M1 thinks that M1 is possessed by Fiona. And frankly, I think that same logic could be applied to Glitch Trap. But we're not even close to being done with this game enough to go look at other games. We got a lot more to talk about here. Speaking of, I didn't even get to Cradle.exe, but frankly, I think that's better left for a transition to a different game, so we'll leave it for now. And that's my thoughts on why M1 is Fiona in the box, and M2 is this weird monstrosity. And again, I don't think M1 or M2 are possessed, or at least I don't currently think so. But I think M1 thinks she is, and I think M2 is an amalgamation of a lot of different people. Because frankly, the reason why M2 doesn't work, I think, is because it's never trained on a specific one person, whereas M1 was. There's plenty of recordings for Fiona for M1 to train on, but there's like barely any recordings of David for M2 to train on. But what do you think? This is admittedly still very confusing. But the best way I can summarize all of this, and you can let me know your take on it in the comments, is that M1 works because it's trained on Fiona's data, but is eventually put into Mexis after Edwin has an existential crisis. And M2 never worked because he never trained it on a specific individual with enough data, but he put it into the mimic endoskeleton and it tried to replicate David, which set Edwin off. And I think it's likely that M1 killed David. That's my summary. That's my TLDR, or I guess TLDW because of the video. But in the meantime, don't forget I've recently started releasing a D&D pre-recorded podcast with myself, David Barron, Posture Spec, Dan Seibert, and my wife. And it's all on my third channel, Ride Doze, being released every other week. In fact, episode 2 just came out, which you can find right here. If you want your fan art featured on the channel, make sure to share it with hashtag Toastart. A huge thank you to the best channel members, the Dough Risers. And until next time, as always, stay toasty, slices.